2,000 years ago, if you were thrown into a prison in Rome, the first thing you'd notice was the dark. Not just turn off the lights dark, absolute suffocating blackness. You couldn't see your own hand in front of your face. The second thing you'd notice was the smell. Human waste, rotting straw, damp stone, and blood. But here's the strange part. Legally speaking, this place wasn't supposed to exist. The great Roman jurist Ulpian wrote that prisons were meant only for holding people, not for punishing them. A holding cell, a waiting room, not a sentence. And yet, what happened inside these walls tells a very different story. The most feared prison in the ancient world sat at the foot of the Capitoline Hill in Rome, right next to the Forum. The Carcer Tullianum, later called the Mamertine prison. It was actually 2 rooms stacked on top of each other. The upper chamber was a trapezoid built from massive blocks of volcanic tuff. But the lower chamber, the Tullianum, was something else entirely. Originally a 7th century BC cistern for a natural spring. A semicircular room 7 meters across and less than 2 meters high. You couldn't even stand up straight. The only way in was through a narrow hole in the stone ceiling. Condemned prisoners were lowered into this pit. The spring water and the blood of the executed drained out through a channel directly into the Cloaca Maxima, Rome's main sewer. Right outside were the Gemonian stairs. After execution, bodies were dragged up those stairs and left to rot in public view, a warning to everyone who passed by. High-profile victims here included Jugurtha, the Numidian king who was starved to death in the pit.
Vercingetorix, the Gallic chieftain who led a rebellion against Julius Caesar, strangled after 6 years of captivity. And, according to tradition, the Apostle Paul was executed here too. But here's the thing about Roman justice. It was not the same for everyone. Roman law officially divided people into 2 categories by the 2nd century AD, the honestiores, the elite, and the humiliores, everyone else. And your category determined everything about your prison experience. If you were rich and accused of a crime, you never saw the inside of a public jail. That would be beneath your dignity. Instead, you got custodia libera, free custody. Basically, house arrest in your own villa. You could manage your properties, prepare your legal defense, even host dinner parties. One Armenian prince was kept under house arrest at a praetor's villa and was occasionally presented as a guest at elite dinner parties. Prison with a side of canapes. There was also custodia militaris, military custody. You'd be chained by a light chain to a rotating series of soldiers, but you could rent your own lodgings, receive visitors, and get food from the outside. The Apostle Paul was held this way in Rome around 61 AD. Archaeologists have found the actual foundations of the apartment building where he was likely kept. Regular Horia-style apartments, not a dungeon. But if you were poor, a humilior, you got custodia publica. Overcrowded, subterranean facilities, no food provided by the state. No water, no light. You relied entirely on family, friends, or Christian charity to survive. And if you had nobody, you starved in the dark. Because the state didn't feed prisoners, the whole system ran on bribes. We know this from an extraordinary source, the diary of a young Christian woman named Perpetua, written in the early 3rd century while she was held in Carthage awaiting execution. She describes the suffocating heat, the absolute darkness, the overcrowding, and the guards' brutality. But her family was wealthy. They bribed the wardens, and suddenly Perpetua was transferred to a cooler section. Her family could visit. They brought food. They brought writing materials. Without those bribes, you rotted. This created a bizarre prison economy. Guards sold favors. Prisoners with money survived. The poor died. But Rome had another kind of prison, one that historians often overlook, the ergastulum. These were private prisons attached to large agricultural estates, a deep roofed subterranean pit, narrow high windows heavily barred, placed far out of reach. At night, enslaved workers slept chained in cramped individual niches. During the day, they worked the fields wearing heavy iron leg shackles. The facility was run by a trusted slave overseer called the Ergastuliarius. The abuse got so bad that during the late Republic, travelers and draft-evading deserters were routinely kidnapped by landowners and thrown into these private prisons. Augustus and Tiberius had to step in with state inspections, and punishment for escape was brutal. Recaptured slaves were branded on the forehead with FUG, fugitivus, fugitive, hamstrings cut, feet amputated.
Repeat offenders were crucified along the highways. After Spartacus's rebellion, thousands of slaves were crucified along the Appian Way, their bodies lining the road for miles. Meanwhile, in the Greek world, the approach was surprisingly different, at least in language. The Athenian prison, the Desmoterion, was physically located right in the Agora, the city center. But Athenians hated talking about it directly. They called it the Demosion, the public house, or the Dikioterion, the place of justice. In daily speech, they just refer to it by the street it was on. Imagine calling a prison the building on 5th Street. That's what they did. The same impulse that made New Yorkers call Sing Sing up the river. Down in Ptolemaic Egypt, prisons were intertwined with the tax system. The Ptolemaic bureaucracy ran debtors' prisons, managed by financial officers. We have papyrus petitions from prisoners begging not for freedom, but for temporary release. One beekeeper needed to move his hives before they died. Another debtor offered to leave his wife in prison as collateral so he could go harvest his crops. But 5,000 miles away, in Han Dynasty China, a completely different system had evolved. While Rome locked people in holes, the Han state put convicts to work. Hard, structured, fixed-term labor. The man who founded the Han Dynasty, Liu Bang, had started his career as a low-ranking transport officer escorting convicts to a construction site. When prisoners escaped on his watch, he knew the punishment was death, so he released the rest, became a fugitive, and started a rebellion that toppled the empire. In 167 BC, Emperor Wen abolished mutilating punishments. Facial tattooing, nose amputation, foot amputation, after a young woman named Ti Ying petitioned him on behalf of her condemned father. He replaced them with fixed terms of hard labor.
The system was highly structured. 5 years of Chengdan for men, building walls and fortresses, shaved head, iron neck collar, leg irons. 4 years, 3 years, 2 years, and down to 3 months for the lightest offenses. Convicts built the Great Wall, compacting earth between wooden boards until it was as dense as rock. They guarded frontier commanderies. They milled grain for the army. A key reform, Emperor Wen abolished shaoxi, the practice of seizing a criminal's family and turning them into state slaves. This meant that when a convict finished his sentence, he could go home to a family that was still intact. A form of reintegration that Rome never even attempted. So what was prison like 2,000 years ago? It depends entirely on who you were. A rich Roman got house arrest and dinner parties. A poor Roman got a dark pit and slow starvation. A Greek debtor got a euphemism and a cage. A Han Chinese convict got hard labor and eventually a chance to go home. None of these systems believed in what we call rehabilitation. They believed in deterrence, in spectacle, in using the body as a billboard for the state's power. But buried in all of it, in Perpetua's diary, in Ti Ying's petition, in the beekeeper's plea to save his hives, are glimpses of something recognizably human. People trying to survive, families trying to hold together. The desperate hope that even in the dark, someone might care.